A very good morning to everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Gillian Roddy and I'm a program manager in Tangent, and I'm going to be your host extraordinaire for this morning. I'm going to just have a very quick introduction kind of slideshow just to give us a sense of what's going to be happening today. And then I'm going to be passing over to Dr. Carl Thomas, who's going to be doing a workshop. So just to reiterate again that the session is being recorded and it is being live streamed. So just be aware of that if you do want to put on your camera. So just give me a moment and I'm just going to share my screen with you now. Okay. So folks, you're very welcome here this morning. I'm absolutely thrilled to be presenting this morning. It takes a village to innovate, today's online workshop, kindly supported by the National Forum for Teaching and Learning. And so I wanted to tell you, before we get started, I want to tell you, first of all, what we're going to be doing this morning. So I'm just going to do a very short, very brief intro, just to give you a little bit of a background about Tangent, about what we do, and really what we're going to be talking about today, and why we chose to talk about this topic. You know, what do we mean when we say it takes a village to innovate? We're going to then hand over to Dr. Carl Thomas, who's going to do a quick workshop with you. And this is really just to show you, to give you an idea of what does an innovation workshop look like? When we talk about, you know, innovation in an education context, what does that mean? Or what does that teaching look like? What does it feel like? And really what we want to try and get across and show you is just how accessible the idea of innovation is when it comes to a classroom setting. And let's face it, if we can do it online, you know, that sort of opens up so many doors for us, this type of teaching that we never would have thought was possible pre-COVID. And all of a sudden we're doing it on a day-to-day basis. We're going to take a quick comfort break then to let everybody stretch out their legs. Very, very important when we're sitting in front of a computer all day. And then we're going to have a discussion panel, and I'm going to be joined by some of our industry partners and by some of our ex-students, and we'll just have some closing remarks and finish up. Now, at this time, one of the things that I have decided that I want to be remembered for in this period of time is being that person who kindly wraps up meetings a little bit early. So that is the goal today. So not only do I promise that we will finish on time, we may actually finish a little bit early, because let's face it, who doesn't love to have an extra 5 minutes in their day? So I'm going to give you a very, very brief intro to Tangent and today's session. So like I said, my name is Gillian Roddy and I am one of the program managers in Tangent, and I work on the accredited education side of the house. So I oversee all of the accredited ed programs. I design and co-develop them with our contributors and learning partners. We have Dr. Carl Thomas, who I will be handing over to in a moment. And Carl is one of the most long-standing contributors, learning partners that we have in Tangent, and has been instrumental in the success and rollout of many of our programs. We'll also be hearing from Kirsty McAdoo, who's the head of education and research in Airfield. And Kirsty and her team have been one of the industry partners that we've worked with numerous times over the projects that I'm going to talk to you about now in a moment. And we have Rachel Delaney, and Rachel started out in one of our PG Cert courses, Innovation and Enterprise Development. And then we took her on board in the Tangent team for about a year and a half. It's always a good sign that you're doing something right when your graduates are the types of people that you want to bring into the fold. So thrilled to have Rachel and Kirsty and Carl joining me this morning. So in Tangent, we're really an innovation and entrepreneurship hub based within Trinity. Now, we are a separate unit to the schools and departments that you have in Trinity. So our main focus is on innovation and entrepreneurship. And we have a variety of different postgraduate, undergraduate, and professional ed courses. So we're really capturing an awful lot of different education opportunities with a very, very diverse audience. This is something that speaks very strongly to me, because I have a strong background in teaching in accessible education, even within Trinity. And what we do in Tangent is in our postgraduate education section, what we have is a suite of postgraduate courses that I'll talk about in a moment, that allow accessibility into education for people who perhaps otherwise would have had the opportunity to get there. So in Trinity, two of the things that we're very, very strong at is innovation. We have very, very strong research partners. There's a huge number of innovations coming out of all of the schools and departments and faculties in Trinity. But we're also very, very strong at entrepreneurship as well. I think we've actually just been named at the PitchBook most entrepreneurial university in Europe again. So this is something that the Trinity holds very, very strongly and very dearly. So what we try and do in Tangent is we are a hub that combines those two elements to be of benefit, not only for the college community, but beyond the college community. And that's really where our Springboard suite of postgrad cert courses comes from. And what we want to try and do is bridge that gap, or bridge education and industry stakeholders. So we run a suite of PG Cert courses supported by Springboard. So they're supported by the HEA. So if you're a student on one of these courses, if you're not in employment, these are fully funded, which means that you don't have to pay any fees. If you're in employment, you only have to pay 10% fees. And as you can see from the list, there's a variety of different topics being covered on those. You know, everything from innovation and enterprise development to climate entrepreneurship to workplace wellness to healthcare innovation. So innovation and entrepreneurship are a core part of a variety of different sectors right now. And what we're doing is we're providing short postgraduate courses for adult learners in an accessible education setting around to develop key skills that are needed in the workplace right now. So a core part of every single one of the things that every single one of those courses has in common, and it's what we're going to talk about today, is at the very beginning of all of those courses, our students do an innovation project. So the students have to solve real world problems using innovation methodologies to bring valuable solutions to the table. And it's really about getting comfortable in that problem space. So today, what we're going to be talking about is what those projects look like. What does it look like when you have students and you bring them together with real industry stakeholders to problem solve real world problems? What you get is you kind of get a triumvirate of value. The students get huge benefit because not only are they learning academically, they're learning in the real world too by engaging with industry. Industry stakeholders are getting massive benefit because they're getting student input around innovation problems, so inspiration and a real understanding of what that looks like. So we'll talk later on about what some of those projects look like, but our students really do go through the full gamut of innovation, ideation, design thinking. You know, these are real projects, and we can talk about what the student experience and the industry experience is like later on. So very last thing to say is, you know, why are we doing this? Well, we're doing it for a variety of different reasons, because not only within Trinity and within Tangent. So Tangent is based in the Trinity Business School. You'll see it there in the corner of where the Trinity campus is. But we now also have the Innovation District. And of course, surrounding Trinity is a variety of different international corporates and businesses and companies. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to show that education is a key part of innovation for all of these company engagements. So this will become clearer and clearer as we go through the morning, but I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I'm already I've carved out 2 of Carl's minutes. I do apologize. So I'm going to hand over to Carl now, and Carl is going to do an innovation workshop with us, and this will give you a better understanding of what it really looks like to do innovation in the classroom. So Carl, over to you.
Cheers, Jill. Okay, folks, you're all extremely welcome. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through what an innovation workshop could potentially look like. We'll talk about some of the elements that we would engage with. I'll maybe share a few of the different, let me just set this up, a few of the different experiences that we have across the sessions and the kind of engagements that we, kind of problems that we engage with as well. And I'm happy to answer questions as we go through this too. So generally, the kind of framework that we use in Tangent is a design thinking model. The design thinking model comes out of IDEO in Palo Alto. And it's what it does quite well is it captures a lot of more complex innovation methodologies in a very sort of accessible and usable framework. And it makes design sort of, as I said, accessible for people who don't really engage with design processes. And that tends to be the kind of the foundational framework that we use in tangent across student courses and across some of the sprints and the innovation activities that land on the doorstep there as well. And there are quite a few outside of just a sort of main student space. And as you can see, the framework is broken down into 5 different stages: empty, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And we'll talk about some of these as we go through, and maybe I'll be asking you guys a few questions, seeing as we have a few people joining us live on Zoom. So what we tend to talk about in that context is that there are these 8 core abilities attached to the design thinking process. And it's about navigating ambiguity, learning from others is hugely important because it's a user-centric process. And it's a process that encourages curiosity and benefits from curiosity. And at the outset of our courses, one of the things that we really try to encourage students to engage with is that mindset of curiosity, and not just arriving in with an answer, but questions. And questions are incredibly valuable when it comes to being an innovator and being an entrepreneur, and combining those 2 kind of elements and mindsets as you move forward through the course, and certainly even through a shortened design sprint. One of the most frustrating experiences when somebody arrives in with the answer and then views the rest of the engagement through the lens of their answer, rather than engaging openly in that kind of capacity for synthesizing new information, combining with the information they have. That navigating ambiguity piece is around sort of allowing ourselves to formulate a hypothesis or an assumption about what a problem might be, and then moving towards sort of validating or more people in, validating or basically analyzing and assessing the validity of our concept or our early assumptions. So I always encourage people to make assumptions, provided that they're prepared to test them. And we'll talk about some of these elements as we go through. One of the really important parts, though, in an innovation workshop or across the innovation courses, it's right in the middle there. It's about experimenting rapidly. And this is something that can be a big challenge for people. We'll talk a little bit about the prototyping process. And you see this in a range of innovation models, but certainly in the design thinking model. There's a real sort of drive to engage with minimal viable products, because again, what we're looking for is feedback really early, and it's sort of it's about not letting that mindset of perfection get in the way of our ability to kind of move forward and learn. So that experimenting rapidly piece is extremely important when it comes to design thinking and innovation in particular. These are a couple of basic definitions that I use, and they kind of explain quite a few elements of what innovation is and what the workshop is sort of founded on. You see there the act of generating more value for the customer in the business of fulfilling a job to be done better than anyone else. And Anthony Ulrich wrote the book on job to be done theory. And it's about recognizing that the people we're solving problems for, because for me, innovation is very much about humans solving problems for humans. It's not just about throwing in technology and robots and all kinds of fun, shiny stuff. It's about recognizing that there's a core human component in there as well. And we're solving problems for our customers in that sense. And I like to use that entrepreneurial language because it sort of reframes the engagement of using customers and end users. And what we really need to be able to do, and part of our innovation workshop that we run, is about sort of getting into that empathy space where we understand what genuine value looks like for the customer. And that's the same if we're talking about teaching in a classroom. Our students are the customers. As an educator, you're the service provider, essentially. We would then talk about fulfilling the job to be done. Well, that's about understanding why they're there and what they need or want to get out of it. That kind of usability, desirability. I also say needability in there. What do they need to get out of it? Because it's not always the case that our customers are fully aware of what they need. So part of what we have to do as innovators and entrepreneurs is to better define that. We'll talk about how we do that in a second. Then we say the means by which we exploit change as an opportunity for a different business or a different service. You know, in the education space, certainly we've seen a big shift and being able to exploit that change, moving on to platforms like this, combining this with platforms like Miro or Mural or any of the other sort of shared collaborative platforms that are out there. And that's allowed, certainly for me and Jill and people in our space, to work differently and provide a different type of service and a different type of engagement. And then we say innovation is a creation and development, implementation of a new product, process, or service with the aim of improving efficiency, effectiveness, or competitive advantage. Whether you're a sole trader or an SME, whether you're a giant corporate conglomerate, competitive advantage is important. Effectiveness and efficiency are important. All of these elements are consistent regardless of the scale of your business, or whether you're working in the sort of a traditional business space or in that newer, more evolving creative and cultural business space. Competitive advantage is still a factor in those spaces, and effectiveness and efficiency are important because sometimes it's about being able to provide our clients with something in a different way. But part of what we need to be able to understand at the outset as innovators is what value looks like, what competitive advantage potentially looks like. And we use a number of those innovation skills. One of the things I tend to get people to do quite a bit early on in our innovation process is to define what they think their favorite innovation is, but particularly with that emphasis on why, because it reinforces that narrative around value and what value looks like. And sometimes we can miss this. So what we're trying to disrupt is that kind of pattern-orientated complacency early on, because we're surrounded by innovation. And there are new ideas everywhere. And we talk about innovation as being something that is inherently new, but provides value. And that's a really important part. Also, what I tend to say is that when we're talking about innovation, newness is a kind of a relative term. And it can be new to your space, but not necessarily new out there in the world, because new ideas are a bit of a unicorn. And not in the business concept of unicorn. So one of the things I encourage people to do very early on is to kind of try and get past that inattentional blindness bias, the change blindness bias, to help them to recognize that innovation exists in their space. You'll ask people a lot of the time, they'll say their mobile phone, they'll deconstruct that, but it's getting back to the human component of why that's valuable. And it can be valuable in different ways for different people. And that's part of what we need to get better at understanding as innovators. Is that kind of range of experience that's attached to a particular product or a service to help us to really quantify what value looks like. So generally, that design thinking model is overset on a double diamond design process, problem space, solution space. And absolutely my go-to mantra in the innovation space is a problem well defined is a problem half solved. And what you'll tend to find is that people rush into creating solutions or rush into bringing the solution that they have in mind to a project. But actually that process of suspended judgment, which is what John Dewey talks about in terms of his definition of critical thinking, is extremely important as part of our innovation workshop. Being able to sit in the problem space and getting comfortable with the ambiguity of the problem space and getting comfortable with I don't know. And this is where your competitive advantage comes in as an entrepreneur, as an innovator. A lot of people look at I don't knows as an opportunity to down tools. Innovators and entrepreneurs look at as an I don't know as an opportunity to move ahead and create competitive advantage. That's that shift in mindset that we look to build into the workshops, to those innovation workshops, to build that internal locus of control, the sense that you can see a problem and affect change rather than seeing a problem and thinking, I don't have the capacity to change this. It's not in my space. So we try to arrest people in that problem space. It's almost like holding horses back and sort of leveraging the energy and getting people to be really, really engaged with their exploration in there before moving into the problem space. I say a problem well defined is a problem half solved. And a well-defined problem, very often the logical next step is a range of good solutions. And we'll talk about why I said a range of good solutions rather than a good solution. Within that double diamond design process, one of the things that we look for is divergent and convergent thinking. The reason why it's in a double diamond, because you want to go extremely broad in terms of your exploration of what the problem is. We bring a lot of biases with us into these spaces, and they frame our understanding of what the problem is. But we don't want to understand the problem from our own perspective. We need to be able to understand the problem from our user's perspective. And that can be challenging because, as I said, these sort of biases tend to frame our engagement with something. And if we're not engaged with, and again, this is a concept related to critical thinking, intellectual humility, recognizing that we have the capacity to learn a lot more than we think we know, we are very likely to then create solutions that don't actually solve the problem the user has. So we try to shoehorn those solutions into spaces where users are less likely to adopt the solution. And that's problematic. And especially if you're trying to bring innovation into an organization where you've got the wrong solution to the wrong problem, people are very quick to then move away from the whole concept of innovation because it hasn't worked, but it hasn't worked for specific reasons. So what we try to do is get people into that divergent space, looking for lots of questions, rewarding each other for our ability to ask lots of questions, encouraging people to recognize that you asking questions doesn't impact your status in the space. It actually reinforces and buttresses your status in the space. And then we move towards a point of convergence in terms of our discovery. And that point of convergence is usually formulated around a problem statement. For me, the format I use is user, need, compelling reason, the because in there, but recognizing that the user is important in that space. The user that we work towards is a persona that's built up of a composite of all of our research. We'll talk about that in a second as well. And then when we move towards that answer part of the double diamond design process, we're doing it with a clear and robust understanding of the problem that we're trying to solve. And it's two wheels on the same bicycle to success in that innovation space. It's incredibly valuable to have that problem space very well defined before we move into our solution space. And again, this can be challenging when you're running an innovation workshop, because culturally we reward quick thinking. We like to give each other high fives for coming up with a quick solution. But generally what's happening in that space is we're solving a symptom of a problem rather than the actual problem. And when you solve symptoms, it just moves the problem to another space rather than taking care of the actual problem in there. So it's something to be conscious of. While we tend to use the design thinking process primarily, you will find that we bring in elements of other innovation processes like TRIZ, for example, which is a fascinating framework for problem solving. But elements of it are already present and evident in design thinking. We bring some more. Also, Google Sprint elements are used to kind of reinforce some of the design thinking processes that we would use in the space. This is a short session that we ran a while back when we could all get together in the room. And it was working with students in the mental health space. There were a lot of neurologists involved, but it was broadly health. And it was really interesting to see coming in across just a 3-day innovation workshop rather than the longer course. But it's kind of a nice truncated sort of microcosm of what we do, where people really engage with the problem space. And you could see the desire to move into the solution space really quick. And we sort of built into the culture of that session, the need to stay in the problem space. And what we actually saw was that other students in the group were kind of pulling people back and pushing them for higher levels of clarity and making sure there was that robust understanding from the user's perspective rather than the practitioner's perspective. And again, because it's innovation, there's a lot of high energy and engagement, and there's fun attached to it. And they ran through the problem space, solution space, and then into the big presentation piece at the end. And a lot of the learning that was sort of engaged with in that space would absolutely be carried through into sort of application in industry. One of the things you tend to find quite often is that innovation is a different way of working for a lot of people. And that's the challenge, because it seems like innovation can be the problem because it's extra work in people's mindsets, but actually it's a different way of working and just takes us a little bit of time to move into that space. One of the things that we push absolutely right the way through the course is the master classes, is this iterative process. And it's not just about iterating ideas, it's about iterating ourselves. There's a big mindset component attached to what we do in Tangent, and across all of the course. I think it's pretty fair to say it's present in that you're almost prototyping yourself in these spaces. And you're allowing yourself to be a prototype, because with that prototype mindset, you're allowing yourself to grow and evolve. I hear people, we talk about saying, well, we can talk about communication as part of what we're doing, because communication is incredibly important in the innovation space. You're talking about new ideas that are potentially challenging, and just a language barrier can be enough to make people comfortable with saying no. So communication is extremely important in there. But we say, okay, we'll develop communication skills, and people will think that it's maybe about sort of being inauthentic by communicating something a different way, but actually it's just leveraging an additional tool to help you communicate the value of what it is you want to see in your end user space. And go back to that point that for me, innovation is very definitely always about people solving problems for people. The kind of the high level technology, that's all about the tools that are potentially used in those spaces. So with iteration, we talk about trying something, it works a certain percent, it doesn't work a certain percent, that's okay. We evolve it, we iterate it. So we basically improve based on the feedback we get. And then we go back to sort of the reproduction of it, bringing it back, getting more feedback, and moving the ideas forward. That's something that we work on quite a bit as part of our masterclass process. Storytelling is huge. We want to hear the stories. We don't just want the cold data. So there's a lot of, in our sort of discovery space, there's a lot of qualitative research attached with the quantitative, because we want that human component. And my approach in here is to start with the one-to-one information gathering sessions, move up to the focus groups, then take that sort of more nuanced understanding and then put that into the questionnaires so I can get the big levels of feedback, but really targeted information as part of that. So we want those stories, but also a big part of our courses is that people are evolving. We see this certainly across module 1 into module 2s and 3s on the courses, that people are changing and they're engaging with new ways of thinking, and they're allowing themselves to try things that they wouldn't have tried previously, and they're allowing themselves to fail forward. And that can be a big challenge for people, because culturally there's this perception, certainly in Ireland, of failure being bad and failure being final. But in aerospace, failure is part of your journey, because it's not a final failure, it's part of your iterative process. And the human story in a student context is extremely important to us in terms of how it sort of marries quite well with the whole innovation process. And certainly then as part of that, we'd look at the kind of the fixed versus the growth mindset element. And it becomes very obvious in the innovation space, in an innovation workshop, what that can potentially look like, and how we challenge the fixed mindset and move towards that growth mindset, because it is necessary as part of an entrepreneurial journey. If you have an absolute belief that your idea is the solution to all of the ills of the world, you're going to learn very quickly that what you previously thought was the case needs to evolve and iterate, potentially needs to be communicated differently to fit different cohorts, or needs to be shaped differently. But if you're bought into that sort of fixed mindset space, then it can be difficult. But again, that's part of our journey on the course, and it's part of what we build in. But again, in a sort of a very targeted way, it's necessary in terms of innovation, because there's a high level of failure for new ideas. Various different research papers will talk about this high level being 70 to 80% roughly, that new ideas fail in different spaces. Because of that, we need to have a growth mindset. We need to recognize that our idea maybe has failed for a range of different reasons, not because it's a bad idea. I see great ideas fail because they're poorly communicated. I see great ideas fail because they're targeting the wrong adopters. I see great ideas fail because they're packaged in a way that doesn't necessarily make sense to somebody who really needs or really wants the idea. So that growth mindset is important there. We learn from feedback rather than being resistant to feedback. One of the things that we do very early on as part of our masterclass is we dismiss this left brain, right brain myth. We all have the capacity for creativity. Domain speciality kind of increases your ability to be creative as well. But it is about getting outside of that fixed mindset. I'm not really creative, or I am a creative and therefore I'm not entrepreneurial, or I'm entrepreneurial, therefore I can't. We all have the capacity to move in different directions. There's no fixedness attached to the sort of these particular elements. And realistically, when you're being creative, you're actually leveraging lots of different parts of your brain as well. So we try to break that early on, and we do that with a few different exercises. The creative fluency exercises are a big part of it. For me, getting people to recognize that one solution is never enough, that we should have multiple solutions, then select from that abundance. And usually what you'll find is the best idea from that position of abundance is a combination of multiple ideas. And that's skill. That's a practice that we learn. It'd be like me saying, I want to run a marathon tomorrow. I can walk, I can run, but I'm not going to be running a marathon tomorrow without lots of training in advance. And it's the same with creativity, but the difference being that we recognize that there's a journey required to run a marathon, but culturally we've created this mindset whereby we think we either are or aren't creative, but actually there's a skill. And I used to lecture on lots of courses in fine arts as well and around critical thinking, and you see the development of the skill of creativity in those spaces. I mentioned this internal locus of control piece. One of the things we want our students to get a handle on very early on as part of our workshops is the sense that it's up to them to spot problems and feel that they can do something about it. And that is that internal locus of control in play. And we look to build that. And not everybody has that, but generally what I will say is if somebody signed up to the course, it's evidence of an internal locus of control. What we help people to do is to recognize that in themselves and then build towards it. And again, that's extremely important as part of your innovation process, because one of the big challenges that I see working across a range of different projects is that people sometimes feel that they don't necessarily have the technical skills, therefore they'll step away from an idea. But as an entrepreneur, one of the things we build in very early is your capacity to network. And that's taking ownership and showing that internal locus of control by recruiting people onto your project to solve problems. So it's not necessarily about you having to have all of the technical skills, but it is about you having the appetite to solve the problem and using your entrepreneurial skills in different ways to basically recruit and bring people on board. And that goes back to that storytelling piece as well. Your capacity for persuasion, your capacity for selling the vision in there. And again, important. We push as a basic sort of component of your innovation entrepreneurial process is your curiosity. We don't want you to just get answers that validate your solution. We want you to get answers that evolve your solution, or maybe dismiss your solution entirely and encourage you to create a new solution. Let me say the important thing is not to stop questioning. I would reward people on a daily basis for questions rather than answers. Answers are great. They're really useful to have. But actually what I would be pushing for in the innovation space consistently is more and more questions, because when you have those questions, then you'll seek answers. If we come in with 5 answers, then we tend to get stuck in that box and think this is what's valuable. But all day, every day, working with different groups, I encourage more and more questions because that then opens up a range of directions that we can move in. And that's that curiosity. It's active curiosity. I'm sure some of you are probably familiar with Miro, but this is what a lot of our workshops look like now. And what a lot of innovation workshops look like at the moment. This was with a small enough group. We've used Miro with hundreds of people in different projects. But this was put together by a group who'd never used Miro before across a 3-hour session with students as a healthcare innovation project. And again, this was completely new and a new way of working for a group who were very capable, very intelligent people, but there's fear at the outset. There's ambiguity at the outset. Things may be a little bit abstract, a little bit amorphic, but that's part of what we do, and that's part of what we encourage. So there's new tools attached to the ways we work. I introduced this with clients as well, getting them to collaborate in different ways. And that collaborative piece is quite important as part of the workshop element in innovation as well, because one of the things we look for is cognitive diversity. Yeah, it's not just about having your idea, it's about having your idea reshaped, reformed, challenged, critiqued by a range of different people with different perspectives in those spaces. So certainly that gives us a chance. As part of our empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test piece, one of the tools that we use quite often is an empathy map, and we use these as part of our information gathering session. And in this space, what I tend to do is get people comfortable with it, is put 2 groups together, 2 people together for 5-10 minutes, and we get them to basically just gather information really broadly, really amorphically. But what they're looking to do in this is to gather what people say, what they do, what they think, what they feel. As you move then towards engaging with a specific problem, speeding outside of schools, you'll find that parents, teachers, and children have very different perspectives on this, and the information we gather across these then go towards sort of formulating the persona that we mentioned. But one of the things I tend to think is quite important in here is that we're gathering language as well, because when we're gathering this language, it essentially becomes the language we use to communicate the value of the idea to our end users. But this is a tool that we use, and again, it's super basic, as are a lot of the tools in the innovation space. But it's extremely basic in the sense that it allows us to gather lots of information through open-ended questions, to recognize the patterns of responses that are coming out that we use to populate this. And again, I love to catch the quotes. They're the ones that I find really useful because they're exactly how I package my solution then going forward. What's really important about this process is that we see that context is extremely important. We appreciate people as human beings. It is very much the empathy piece. It's not about going in and telling people your perspective of the problem. It's about them telling you their perspective of the problem. And it's about you discovering the wow in there as well, and being shocked and being surprised. I always find that extremely valuable, because when I've got that feeling, I know I'm learning something I didn't know previously, and that's valuable when it comes to that innovation process. We're looking for clarity. We're looking for the highest. I always preach aggressive levels of clarity. Clarity is a great gateway standard in critical thinking. We're looking for clarity for ourselves and for our end users, making sure we have that shared clarity, but also across our teams. What we want to really understand as part of our empathy and define stages is the as is. What is the situation as it stands? We'll work on the to be later. As I mentioned earlier, I encourage, as part of our empathy stage, to formulate a hypothesis, to make assumptions. We're testing those assumptions in that space. We're always testing the assumptions. We never move forward with the assumptions. It's perfectly okay to arrive on a course or into a workshop with a hypothesis or an assumption in place, but we break it. We break the behavior of moving forward with it. We test them all the time. And part of how we do that is through that information gathering process. I might just move through this quite quickly. These are some of the challenges that I set people to get them comfortable with this. Sort of, what does a more inclusive university look like, for example? So they have to go out and discover what the potential barriers are and the problems are. And one of the sort of the interesting psychological gaps in there is that we tend not to recognize a need if we don't have that need ourselves. So there's a lot of discovery when we use something like this, where people think everything is awesome. You know, of course, universities are accessible, until we then talk about, well, okay, if you're using a wheelchair, if you're in those spaces where there's a mental health component in play, what does that potentially look like? And then, as part of our engagement moving forward, what we look to do, I'm taking back those 2 minutes, Joe. What we look to do is generate multiple ideas. One idea is never enough in the innovation space. So we look for creative fluency. We look to make sure that people are generating a lot of ideas and then being selective about it. When you've selected your one idea, sometimes we use an impact effort matrix. We then move forward into that prototyping space, where we will start to build a really ugly, minimal viable product that represents the idea and allows us to get feedback really quickly. That's part of our testing phase. And that's essentially how we run through those innovation masterclasses, innovation workshops. We can do this in a very short framework. Sometimes I run sprints across 3 hours. Sometimes you run sprints across a week. But obviously the different amount of time give you different opportunities to engage with your end users, because again, innovation is all about people solving problems for people. And we do that in different ways. Okay, I think we're on our time. I just took 1 minute back, Joe.
That's absolutely perfect. Thank you very much.
No
Can I take back the screen if that's okay? Perfect.
There you go.
Carl, thank you so much. It's always so lovely. Even when, you know, from my side, it's always lovely getting an encapsulated version, just a reminder of what we do, because it's the journey that the students take really is a lovely one.
Yeah.
Folks, we're going to take a comfort break as promised. You know, we're spending a lot of time in front of our screens. Go stretch your legs, walk around. We're going to start again at 10 to 11, and I will be welcoming the panel onto screen, and we'll have a really nice juicy discussion. And feel free to pop some questions in the chat box as well. I'll be keeping an eye on that. So if you have any questions for the panelists, do shout. So go make a cup of tea, put on the kettle, stretch your legs, have a comfort break, and we will start again in about 8 minutes. Fantastic. So this morning we've been talking about, the notion that it takes a village to innovate, and we're looking at all of the various different stakeholders who are involved in the student projects that we run in Tangent, and really looking at innovation as a holistic process where it requires both the education, the academic side of things, to provide the knowledge base for students to understand what the innovation process looks like. But really, it also takes the application of that knowledge, you know, in the form of company projects, in order for the students to really understand what it looks like in practice. So I will say once again to the audience, if anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to stick them in the chat box where I'll be able to see them, and I will put it to the panelists. But first of all, I'd like to come to you, Rachel, because you are a past pupil of one of our courses. Could you tell us about first of all, tell us about yourself and the experience that you had on the course, but I'd love to hear from you what your experience of the innovation project was.
Thanks, Jill. Yes, I suppose when I started on the program, I had no concept of what innovation was or what it meant, in reality, and how it applied to business. So the project that we would have embarked on really gave us an opportunity to put that into practice. It's very easy, I think, for things to remain theoretical when you're learning about them in an academic context. And so to be kind of plunged face to face with a real business, with a real problem, and being forced to kind of scramble to gather these newfound skills and apply them in a real setting, it just gave a kind of an invaluable learning opportunity, I think. And
what was your background, Rachel, before you came onto the course? Because, in a third level setting, when you talk about university students, everybody, we tend to think of, 20-year-olds, they've come straight from school, straight into their college course. That's what a university student looks like. But you came in as a springboard to adult learner. So what was your background coming into the course? And I suppose, what were you bringing to the table?
Yeah, so the name of the program that I took was Innovation and Enterprise Development. And I suppose it was the enterprise development side of it that attracted me to the program. I'd had a couple of businesses myself, and I knew I wanted to increase my skills in running a business. And I'd just done another program in enterprise development as an adult learner. But really, I was a true returner. I had had a long break from education, formal education, and I had spent a lot of years working. So it was a baptism of fire, I think, in a little bit of throwing myself back into, writing assignments and conducting research and all that side of things that comes with being an adult learner while trying to work and get on with your life and do everything else. So, like I said, the enterprise development side of the program was what attracted me to it, but little did I know how big of an impact the innovation and the innovative mindset would add to the program, but also add to my life and my approach and how I approached business in general.
Tell us more about that, the innovation mindset and the impact that it had. Can you tell us what that looked like, or what does that mean to you, or how do you use it now?
It's not so much about how I use it now. It's about how there's very few areas of my life in which I don't use it. So the elements of innovation that I would have learned through the Tangent program would have been the kind of design thinking approach, or a failing forward mindset, and a continual improvements and iterations, and that nothing is ever a failure when it can be improved upon, and how to fully explore an idea and make sure that it's satisfying the outcome that you wanted to achieve, and how can we make this better, and are we taking the right steps at the beginning in order to craft the right solution? Do we fully understand the problem? And these sorts of
I don't know where it goes to.
Ways
I don't
of
know
thinking.
either. That was there before.
These ways of thinking have just seeped into every aspect of my life now, not least how I approach business.
Thanks a million, Rachel. There's some ideas in there I really want to come back to. I'm going to pick at those a little bit. Thank you very much. Kirsty, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Kirsty, you're head of research and learning at Airfield in Dundrum, is that right?
Yeah, that's it. So we've been working with the Tangent program on a number of different projects that we've had, kind of everything from kind of social media to the estate in general, and how we operate as a tourist and hospitality destination, and just kind of in general, just looking at programs and events that we have on the estate as well.
Brilliant. So Kirsty, walk us through the process. So from our side, we would contact you. So if we know that we have a course coming up, we will contact you as one of our very valuable stakeholders, industry stakeholders, and it is, and I will genuinely say it's wonderful to work with people like Kirsty and Airfield. So we will contact you, and we'll have a chat. But we've kind of we've even tried iterating it over the cohorts, haven't we? Because it's kind of started out that it was perhaps the companies were coming to us with ideas around problems, but that's now morphed a little bit, and actually you provide us with some really rich information, but it's down to the students to identify problems. So what's it like from your side? Talk us through the process, you know, with engaging with the students. What does that look like for you?
Well, I think you're absolutely, you hit the nail on the head. It's not necessarily us coming up with, we have an issue around this little bubble and we would like you to look at this little bubble and solve it for us. What's really worked for us is that we've come to them and just been really open with a lot of information, a lot of any reports that we have, any data that we have, very open about things that have worked in the past, that haven't worked. But I think the key part of it is that we haven't really ever said, no, don't do that, to the students, because we want to give them the opportunity to come up with something that we haven't thought of ourselves. That's the whole point of this. But we're also not under time pressure. That's really important as a company with regards to this kind of, we're not looking for them to create a solution for us that we will then action in next week and, all the rest of it. It's about giving them the space and the opportunity to kind of go, well, could you have elephants? Could you have them paragliding in from the sky? Like it could be anything. And it's about giving them that opportunity and that space to kind of go, well, that's a really good idea. And but think about the money that's now associated with putting that together, or think about the time length that would, so they come to us with the ideas. And I think our responsibility is to kind of have that business head on us that goes, okay, but if I was someone paying for this information from you, I'd need a timeline. I'd need you to understand that I have a budget. I need you to understand that it would mean that I'd have to employ somebody to do that. So we kind of add the leveling part of it and give them feedback, because you have such great and diverse groups of students that come with a viewpoint that we would never have ourselves, which is fantastic. But we have to kind of come back and say, okay, well, put your business hat on now and, take your creative idea and make it practical in the real world.
Yeah, it's put your business hat on. That's maybe that's the challenging bit. Everyone loves the ideas. Yeah. I mean, I'd love to see elephants in airfields. I mean, why not?
Absolutely. What could go wrong?
Can we not just do an ideation session around that this morning? Like, let's go for
absolutely. You muck them out, you can have them.
Carl, I'd like to come to you for a moment. You've taught on a number of different cohorts and a number of different courses. Can you give us a very high level overview? Like, what have you got any musings, or what have been your take home? Are there any trends that you tend to see with our student cohorts? What does their journey look like, or what are the particular, I think the pain points in particular, but also then what do the highs tend to look like?
Well, I suppose at the end of module one, there's elation. You see that at the end of any of the pitches and presentations. I think it's probably because people don't realize the kind of change and the stress that goes along with that journey that they've been on. You see resistance, you see individuals being resistant, you see the discomfort around it. But one of the things I always sort of recognize on these courses that people probably learn as much from each other as they do from me or any of the other instructors or any of the other lecturers, whatever they want to call themselves. But I'd see myself as a facilitator. That's basically it. I learn as much probably as they do, which is a nice situation for me to be in. But I'd certainly say that there's huge camaraderie across it. There's incredible elation at the end of it. And people probably don't realize this is the change blindness piece. They don't realize that they're evolving and growing across that module one piece into module two, into module three. And it's kind of only when they pause and do that kind of process of reflection that they do see that there has been quite a journey. So it's probably that there's resistance, but resistance that's overcome as a group rather than as an individual. And that shared learning piece is incredibly important. The camaraderie then supports that capacity to evolve together. And then the eventual outcome is sort of just a general sense of elation, and not just because of the submission of work or the kind of the final picture project, but it's a really sort of authentic shared happiness at the end of that. And that we hear it from people all the time. I remember Rachel's group quite well, but You hear it from groups all the time that they're still connected, you know, that are still close to each other, which is, to me, is kind of entrepreneurship 101. It's the kind of your network, it's just the people you know, it's the people they know as well. And you see a lot of that shared support. So certainly there are sort of some of the elements that I'd recognize. And they're not even related to the content that you're covering. It's just the journey part.
Well, that's it really. And I think this kind of alludes to what Rachel was saying earlier on about the innovation mindset, that it is about sort of turning some of your preconceived notions upside down. One of the things that and I will say, one of the things that we have over the years, and we've struggled with a little bit with some of the innovation projects, especially at the very beginning, there is that mentality. And as somebody who said to me recently, it's because of the working world that we live in. We have been taught to bring solutions to the table. How many times have we heard that? You know, a boss loves to say, you know, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. And we race to find the solutions. Whereas here, what we're doing is we're actually encouraging people to sit for as long as possible in the problem space. And that's tough. That is really, really hard, because that forces people to really interrogate their own thinking processes. And not everybody's going to be able to do that. Somebody can't, some people can, and some people can't. We keep using, it's always funny for me, because we use a variety of different words to describe our students, participants, our cohorts. And coming back to that idea that they're not, this is a third level postgraduate setting, but they're not typical students. Kirsty, can you tell us a little bit, you know, and you mentioned the diversity of the groups that you've worked with, but tell us about, can you remember any of that? What backgrounds did people have? Like, what did it look like? Was there any, and we don't have to know names or anything, but was there anybody who kind of struck you and you said, oh my goodness, they're really strong at X, Y, and Z? Or I just want to, you know, what did the groups look like, or how did they stand out to you?
Yeah, we had a really spectacular group that were just fantastic, because they had a real mix. They had someone in hospitality, but they also had like performance artists in the group. And that was just, it was wonderful to be a part of, because the questions that they were asking us, you know, they were much more bigger picture questions rather than the nitty gritty kind of, well, how many people do you have in through the door, that kind of day, you know, and all that sort of stuff. It was, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? You know, like it was really, it kind of blew the doors wide open. And they came back to us with a fantastic suggestion of having a brewery on the estate and using old bread. To create it. And it wasn't just that it fitted into what exactly kind of our mission and aim was about food and food waste and all that sort of stuff, but it also was a visitor attraction that someone would want to come and see. It added to that side of the business model. And I just thought, you know, like it was just so fantastic to have a group kind of come to you with an idea that was just really novel and really interesting, and you know, that could self-finance. They thought about kind of all of the different aspects of it. And that was fantastic. You know, it's lovely to get that sort of stuff back, because, and key to it was that they'd use their diverse skill set, they'd listen to each other, and they'd listen to us as well. Like they had listened to what our mission, our aim is, they tied it all in, it all made sense. They'd done their research, they'd looked at their groups, all of that sort of stuff, who the consumer was that they were trying to target. It was fantastic. It was really, it stands out. I still talk about it to people, you know, like, and all the rest of it, and keep trying to slip that idea in under the radar that we could have our own brewery on the estate, because coffee is all well and good, but a beer at lunchtime, now that'd be really great.
Absolutely. Open up a whole new market.
Exactly.
Oh, summer evenings in Airfield. My good Kirsty.
Exactly. With the elephants and the beer.
Absolutely. The whole thing, we're getting the whole thing going this morning. Love it. Absolutely love it. But it is, and it's funny, and again, this kind of comes back to what Carl was talking about earlier, you know, that this notion of, you know, ideation and being unafraid to throw out ideas and get it wrong. I think that's a key part of those projects. And we do see that journey that students go through, from being quite unafraid to speak up for fear that they'll be judged because their idea is silly, you know, and then realizing actually sometimes the sillier the better, because guarantee that if we started teasing out that idea of summer nights in airfield with elephants and home brews,
Yeah,
a really good idea would eventually come out of it.
exactly.
Not being afraid.
That's the nature of psychological safety, and it's
Yeah.
one of the fundamental components of innovation in every setting, in organizations and in the sort of the more dynamic. I tend to say organizations are like ships, and your innovation people are like your speedboats that circle the ship and allow you to. But psychological safety is a necessity in that context, and that's. I remember that group. I remember the project at CCEN, and it's really useful. One of the things that the network piece in terms of what groups are doing in here is that it's not just the people in your group, that there is kind of an alumni element to this as well, that you can kind of lean into the wider kind of tangent brain that's out there. And then you do get the benefit of being sort of in a very sort of traditional business path, leading into people who have performance art skills, who look at problems from an entirely different perspective and ask different questions as well. So that's the beauty of the diversity, the cognitive diversity across the range of courses there.
Well, that is a really good point, because innovation and entrepreneurship very often are associated with a particular type of person, that business, especially if there's an enterprise development element to the course. In fact, and which there is on pretty much all of our courses, but there's that sense that it attracts a certain type of person. But, and I'll ask, so, you know, how diverse are some of the students that we've had? So we've had performance artists, there's poets, there's writers, there's journalists, I'm trying to think of some of the really weird animators. We had some of the healthcare innovation, obviously we have healthcare administrators, all the way to surgeons, to
some of the highest paid consultants in Ireland on those courses.
Absolutely.
You know.
And everybody is bringing something to it. But it is fascinating, because no matter how diverse the group, there will always be that element of imposter syndrome, no matter how high up anybody is. And seeing those personalities all come together is fascinating. Rachel, I want to come back to you for a moment. And Carl, I'm going to tap into that notion of psychological safety in a few minutes. So just have a think about that, and particularly what is it? What do we do, or what can people do to create psychological safety? But Rachel, I want to come to you, because I did, when I was doing the introductions earlier on, before you were here, I did say that we were particularly delighted because, you know, Rachel, you started out your journey with Tangent as a student, but then you came into the fold as a Tangent staff member and then left us again. But we won't talk about that. We, as I said as well, you know, that it really speaks to the quality of your courses if you're very comfortable taking your own graduates in as an employee and then setting them forth into the world. Rach, tell us a little bit about, you know, how was your experience, you know, when you were a student, and then what did that then bring you or give you to bring into Tangent, and how did that then feel? Because one of the things that we find in Tangent is that everything feeds into everything else. There is this constant iterative process that we employ. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so there's one word that I'd use to sum that up, actually, and I'm glad you didn't say it, because now mine has more impact, and that's culture. Yeah. So you come in as a participant and you start to realize, hold on, how we do things here is totally different than what I've experienced in my life. And for adult learners who come from lots of different working experiences, or maybe one very long work experience, you know, where a culture is very rigid, or, you know, slow to change and slow to adapt. And that is a lot of places and a lot of workplaces, certainly. And then you come into Tangent and it's not like that at all. And not only is it not like that, but you're surrounded with a load of people who are going through the same thing and experiencing the same thing. And as Carol said at the end of module 1, the experience that you have and that psychological safety that you've achieved in your group, and you know, that freedom to express ideas, even if they are as mad as elephants and paragliding elephants, you know, that kind of comfort and that fear of sounding ridiculous, or, you know, that freedom gives you the opportunity to fully explore your ideas and the comfort to voice them without judgment. And that culture is something that permeates the group, both from a participant, but also from the facilitator and the contributor and the lecturer's point of view. And then when you carry that experience as a student and you see these businesses come in and you say, hold on, there are businesses that already think like this and are open to these ideas and aren't saying, hold on now, give me the budget and give me the forecast And while those are important elements to bring in, bring us those mad ideas, because we want to hear them and we want to challenge the norm and we want to think outside the box. And so not only does it kind of give you that freedom as a student, but it opens your mind in terms of there are organizations out there that can think like this. And that's an amazing kind of enlightening, realization. So then I think as to come in as a staff member and find that culture is within Tangent as well. And no wonder it's fed so seamlessly to the student experience, because that's how Tangent operates. And that's the behind the scenes just as much as it's the public facing side of it.
Thanks, Rachel. It's always nice to hear these things. And that comes back to, I think, one of the things that we do have, and building that culture, a core element of that culture comes back to that psychological safety. Carl, how do you make psychological safety? What is it and why is it important? And particularly in the context of, again, it is coming back to the title of the session, it takes a village to innovate. It is the psychological safety element underpins everything that students do in that first module, because if they don't feel safe in the journey that they're about to embark on, essentially nothing can happen. So what is it, and how does it get created? How is it made?
Well, I suppose to say as well, it's not just important on these courses, it's important in every space where innovation happens. Organizations, you see the absence of it, you see the presence of it, and you see the impact of both of those states in terms of people's ability and willingness to kind of put their hand up and say, look, I've got this ridiculous out there idea. What it is, well, there's sort of a range of different components. What I tend to say is there's the pro-social climate created by leaders, the sort of the mindset model in there that encourages people to engage with innovation, to think about it, to ask questions. You mentioned it earlier, an awful lot of businesses are firefighting, an awful lot of leaders are actually affecting more as managers than leaders, which means they're more involved in maintaining the status quo rather than leading towards vision. There's also a lot of sort of different models in terms of demand and control that impacts people well-being in organizations and makes them engaged and want to generate ideas. What you have when people come onto this course is you've got a degree of vulnerability early on because people are in a new space and they're adult learners as well. And there's an expectation that adults should have answers. And now they're in a space where they're not expected to have answers, they're expected to have questions, and that's okay. So we build that quite early on. But one of the things I tend to do quite often is by helping collectively people explore their why. Why are you in the space? What is it you want to do in the space? What do you want to achieve? I'm doing that sort of publicly as part of the group and allowing people to kind of explore their own thinking. And you get a really interesting range of answers. And that's that shared learning piece, because some people are more comfortable with their vulnerability than other people. But what you'll find is that when one person is open and comfortable with their vulnerability, it makes the next person open and comfortable with their vulnerability, and then the next person, and that's part of what you're looking at, and that sort of psychological safety. And I'm, as a facilitator, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with my vulnerability, and I kind of use my experience to kind of lead and create space in those sessions. That then means that people are less status orientated. It's less about being right and more about what is right is actually learning. And it's sort of evolving and shifting that. And then when we get into the kind of the ideation and the innovation process, the history of that behavior facilitates psychological safety. And that's one of the pillars of psychological safety, as well as kind of the presence and history of broader divergent ideation in the space. So people are kind of recognizing as a kind of a journey towards this, that actually vulnerability is okay, being wrong is okay, failing forward is okay, not being perfect, ignoring the myth of perfection, that it should always be something just out of reach. And then when you get closer to it, your expectation evolves and changes what perfection is, so that should be out of reach. But really for us in the innovation space, the real component of psychological safety that's important is just a willingness to put your hand up and say, paragliding elephants, and being able to put those ideas out there and expect and be comfortable with the fact that Rachel will critique and give extra shape to that and evolve it. It's that yes and rather than the head shake or the eye roll, the contemptuous eye roll that kind of just dismisses all of the. So at the outset, it's kind of the primus inter pares model, the first among equals. I'll facilitate that, or one of the other facilitators will facilitate that. But then very quickly the groups take over and they start to create that for the rest of the group. And people have that shared understanding. It's about creating the culture early on, as Rachel said, but that's consistent. And then everybody has ownership, because in innovation, we have a much flatter model of leadership. It's not that sort of plumb line hierarchy of one voice at the top impacting everything. It's one voice initially, but then everybody else kind of recognizes the value of that and the benefit of that to them, and then they take ownership of it. So you do have that sort of self-led, group-led model that kind of then permeates through and reinforces the value of psychological safety in the space. And it is literally people being able to put their hand up and say, go with me on this. I have an idea. It's all the way out there, but help me shape it better. And that's part of that. There's no such thing as a bad idea piece that we get into. We all know there is, but in a certain setting and a certain part of the innovation process, it's a necessary mindset to allow the ridiculous to happen. And then we reverse engineer the ridiculous and make it relevant and applicable. That's part of that psychological safety piece that you definitely see in the, I've seen it on every course. But it's something that organizations struggle with still. But
I think
certainly,
when you know how much fun it is, and when you know what great things can come of it, it's sort of hard to understand why it's not adopted more from the process.
Yeah, it's because it's different, and anything different is a challenge to us. That's just the nature of who we are.
That's true. Kirsty, can I come to you for a moment? Kirsty, this notion of innovation, we know it's important, but sometimes it can be slightly challenging to qualify why it's important. Can you tell us about what role is innovation playing for Airfield at the moment? What is messaging around innovation for you in a company setting, and what does it look like? We know what it looks like for us sort of when we're teaching it, but I won't say in the real world, this is the real world too, but for you, what is innovation and what role is it playing for you?
I think fundamentally it's about finding that niche. So almost every business is competing with other businesses for people, for income, for resources, all of that sort of stuff. And innovation is what sets you apart. It's what makes you interesting. It's what makes you engage, from our perspective, that the public want to engage with us. It's not just about getting the same information in the same way and doing the same things day in and day out. That's not what we're about as a business. We want to make sure that we are constantly kind of pushing the public that we interact with in a way that they haven't been before, but in a nice, friendly, kind of give us your money kind of way as well. And that's really important because we need to survive. So if we're not innovating, if we're not changing, then no one will come to us in 5 years' time. And we could be really successful at what we're doing right now, but we need to be thinking 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line. And innovation and giving space to students to come and work with us on that is fantastic, because like the example of the brewery, is it going to happen tomorrow? No. Is it going to happen maybe in 5 years? Yeah, it could. And, that's what it's about, because in 5 years' time, we'll need something new to talk about. We'll need something new to keep people on board with. It can't be a knee-jerk reaction. And innovation isn't a knee-jerk reaction to a problem. It's about having that space to think, about having that long-term plan in place. And that's what's really important to us.
I've actually been speaking to quite a few people about this burning platform mindset. Speaking to the business post about this recently. An awful lot of organizations think innovation would be something nice, but actually it's incredibly necessary. And Kirsty said sort of 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. I've been saying to people, look, if you're thinking 5 years down the line, half it, because no organization is above disruption. And it's not necessarily your competition that you're competing with, it's the competition that haven't formulated their startup yet that you're competing with, or certainly for me with a lot of clients, it's their clients that are potentially being disrupted that they have to be aware of as well. So what innovation teaches is not necessarily just about solutions, but it's about adaptability. And if people are thinking innovation is something nice rather than necessary, then it's the wrong mindset to have, because definitely we're in a kind of a burning platform space whereby all organizations are evolving and changing. Client expectations are evolving and changing, and that's happening at a rate far quicker than it happened previously. So when people do say to me kind of 5 years, 10 years, I'm like, half it, you know, and sort of push yourself to be a leader rather than you know, then it's not necessarily the knee-jerk reaction. I always say, I don't want my surgeon innovating when I'm on the table. I want the innovation done and they have it prepared to go, that when that happens, we're good. But it's, yeah, I mean, if we're thinking of innovation as just something that's nice and fun, it is nice and fun, but it's also incredibly necessary that an awful lot more organizations are genuinely at risk of disruption, but haven't shifted their mindset because they're status quo orientated. They're about maintaining rather than evolving.
Absolutely, and the challenges of those that mindset, Rachel. Don't want to put you on the spot here, but I am going to. It's all very well talking about, you know, all of the good stuff. What were the challenges? Why? How was this hard? What was the stuff that you weren't prepared for?
Well, as I said, as a student, you know, as an adult learner, the move to formal education was challenging. You know, so it was hard. And then you spend your class time and your learning time swimming about in this pool of, you know, comfort and innovation and creativity. And then you have to go and you have to put it in black and white, and you have to understand and explain concepts, and you have to present a project. And how do you take all of these big ideas and write a paragraph about it? So that's a really challenging aspect of it. But the beauty of how Tangent adapts its learning is that you're in fact learning without even realizing. And like Carl said, we learn so much as participants from one another. And the way that it's taught, there's so much space built in for the human stories that enrich that learning experience. And it's kind of subtly underpinned with all of the academic content. So sometimes you do have to root around to realize, like, you get faced with an assignment and you're like, hold on, how am I supposed to answer that? And then you have to stop and you think, well, how did I get here? What did we cover? What have we learned about? What are the tools and the concepts? And you do have that panic moment when you're like, oh, how am I supposed to translate this into academics? But in fact, it's there. You just haven't realized that you've learned it because it's been so fun, like you said, and you know, and you do get swept along with it. So it is sometimes a challenge to change that approach to the pie in the sky thinking, to what's the critical evaluation here, what's the analysis, you know. And that's definitely a challenge. Like, it is, you have to remember that, you know, it's a postgrad certification and there is the assignment element of it, but the knowledge is there. It's just a matter of going and digging it out from all of the experience that you get along the way.
Yeah. And that challenge has transferability as well. You know, you're challenging yourself in an academic setting, but that ability to challenge yourself, think critically, would have myriad real world applications.
But as well, I think it's that switch between imagination, reality, reality, and that kind of divergent and convergent switch. Just like Kirsty said, you come with the idea of the elephants paragliding. You need to put a forecast on that. You need to put a budget on that. You need to put a time frame on that. That's real life. So you need to be able to manage both aspects of it. So having all of that experience and the psychological safety and the creativity and the ideation, and then coming back and saying, well, how am I going to write an academic paper about this now? That's a great taste of the reality of living in an innovative way, where you have to have all of that ideation, but you also need to have the practicalities of it as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Rachel. Kirsty, we've worked with a variety of different companies who've been overwhelmingly just fantastic to work with, but it's still something when I reach out to companies to see if they would like to work with us on projects, it can be sometimes a little bit of a struggle to get buy-in. How do I convince people? How do I go out to a company? What do I need to say? What am I going to say? You know, what is the value for a company of working with us on these types of student projects?
The value, I think, especially from our perspective, is that we're a relatively small company. We have 46 people working on the estate, and the majority of the kind of higher up end of that company have been there for a while. And as wonderful as we think we are about our jobs and how great we are, innovation becomes more difficult when you find yourself in a role for a few years. So by having a group of students come in and go, well, have you done this? Have you done this? And like, I'm still very young, obviously. But the internet is a terrifying place for me, and social media and all that sort of stuff. And I just don't know anything about it, not anything about it, but I just don't know. I just, it's not my world. It's not where I'm part of. And the students that come into us, they have that knowledge. So we can tap into that. They have knowledge outside of anyone on our staff, and that's knowledge that we can tap into and utilize and use. And so we've found that, by being really open and honest, we have an advantage. I suppose we're an educational charity at the end of the day. So I am more than happy to share with other companies and other students as much information as we possibly can, because we've been on a journey and we want to save people time and make sure that they don't make the same mistakes that we have, or, go down the same kind of dead ends and all that sort of stuff. So to me, it's about sharing as much information as possible with the students, and knowing that you're giving them as well the kudos of understanding that this is a business, agreement between the two of you. You're not going to go and tell everyone in the world, like the intricacies of our business and all the rest of it. But I need you to understand, in order to give, proper information back to me and proper innovation back to me, I need to be open and honest about, what we do and how we do it and why we do it that way. But also be very ready to kind of take criticism from students as well, to kind of go, well, have you thought of doing it this way and that way, and why do you do it that way, and have you looked at your Facebook, and have you looked at your TripAdvisor, and and all that sort of stuff. So those are really, really important parts that might not necessarily be front and center in my mind when it comes to innovation and how we deal with it. But for other companies wanting to get involved, it's so refreshing to sit with a group of people that aren't in your office for an hour a couple of times, over the space of a couple of weeks, and have them go, God, that's really good. I didn't know you did that. And, it's great because it builds your confidence in what you're doing. But then it also means that at the end of it, they're coming back to you and saying, well, have you thought of this, 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 and this? And I just don't have the time in my day sometimes to sit and innovate and sit and mull over a problem and think, well, maybe I should do it this way, this way, this way. And so working with Tangent gives you that opportunity. And it's, for a couple of hours a week for, over the space of a month or so, like, it's fantastic to kind of see what they're doing. And you feel like you're giving something back in the business world as well. You don't want them to be wasting their time, when they get to a place, and just, thinking, gosh, maybe we should do this, do this, do this. And, have the opportunity to have open and honest discussion in a safe environment, like we've been talking about, is just, as they say, Heineken don't do courses, but if they did, like, it's about having that space that you can talk to someone and you can try something out without having to worry about your wage at the end of the day. And that's invaluable for us to have that kind of thinking coming at us. And it spurs on conversations in the office. It spurs on conversations at a senior level. And that's exactly where we want to be. So working with Tangent is a no-brainer for us.
I'm torn between saying thank you very much and also, can we poll senior management in airfield? If it's not elephants, like, what else? What are the top animals? Top choice for animals? Llamas.
Yeah.
And if we can get some cheetahs in there, maybe just for the speed.
Well,
let's talk
don't
to
mix
Voda.
the two, though. That's the danger. That's where innovation. You have to come in with your business hat and go, maybe the cheetahs and the llamas not great together, but
Didn't we have a llama farm? Did I judge one of the projects? There was a llama farm on one of them.
Katie, that we're working with the alpaca farm again. The alpaca farm. Yeah, and it's absolutely. I am a zoologist, so if there is animal wrangling to be done, we've got people on staff who can help out with that.
We had reindeer escape one year, so maybe animals aren't the best thing in the world for.
Did you?
Yeah.
Did they get far?
No, thank goodness. No, thank goodness.
Okay.
'Cause no child needs to see us, lassoing a reindeer before Christmas in the middle of Dundon High Street. But anyway, I digress.
And it brings up a really interesting point. Like, so the different types that we've had alpaca farm, airfield. What are the other different types of companies we've worked with? I'm thinking off the top of my head now. Pharmacists. We've worked with a few company pharmacists. We've worked with a couple of. It's funny actually. And Rachel, you and I have spoken about this at length. When it comes to innovation, the bigger the company, you think more manpower, more ability to do these things, but actually the bigger the company, the more challenging innovation becomes.
Yeah, I think that innovation as a term, though, is one of those buzzwords that's thrown around, and it tends to lose meaning. So from a business's point of view, who have this innovation on their kind of viewfinder, but don't really know how to apply it to their business. I think a lot of businesses think we need to change massively or pivot our business or invent something that nobody has ever done before. We don't have anything novel to introduce to our industry. Yeah. And I think that there's this concept that innovation means massive change, but working with a team like a Tangent team allows you to dip your toe into the water of innovation and see this is what it looks like in reality. And this is how small changes can be applied to our business that make us more innovative and give us that competitive edge. And like Kirsty said, that give you the opportunity to sit down and really explore who's coming through the gates. What do they want? What are they happy with now? What would they love to see? Where are they spending the rest of their time? And sit down and really, like you said, sit with that problem and make sure that we fully understand that, and only from there can an effective solution be crafted. So absolutely, from any company's point of view, you don't need to have an established innovative culture within your business to know that innovation is something that you should be getting to grips with.
Yeah.
No, a lot of the time in organizations, there's a fear around innovation because more often than not, what we're exposed to culturally in terms of what innovation is high-level tech innovation. It's the Teslas, it's the Googles, and organizations are kind of a bit worried about being exposed in those spaces, but actually we tend to break innovation down in incremental, sustaining, and then disruptive. But building, and this is where psychological safety comes into play as well, having evidence of incremental innovation in your space, which are the small ideas. They're valuable, they create value, they contribute to your competitive advantage, they can contribute to your efficiency and your effectiveness. But they are the things that we point at and say, actually, this is what helps us to move towards being that more innovative culture in the space. And the kind of teams that would go in as part of the projects have the capacity to maybe desensitize people to the fear around what innovation is, because it exposes them to a softer element of innovation and a more incremental model of innovation than they might perceive innovation being. And then, there's use if leveraged in an organization to say, well, actually, we got these 4 or 5 people in, just have a conversation around that. And I meet people at conferences and they say, look, I thought innovation was about curing cancer and self-driving cars and robotics. And you say, well, actually, no, it's about humans solving problems for humans. And sometimes they're very small solutions and they're part of that incremental agenda attached to innovation, which is hugely valuable. The more evidence you have of those small elements of innovation, the more desensitized we are to the fear of innovation means big shifts and big changes and new business models. That's your sustaining into disruptive innovation. And it's not something every organization needs to worry about. And the worry about it is often bigger than the reality of implementing it. 2 years ago, most organizations would have been terrified of the prospect of people working from home, but we all did it, and they all evolved and they all shifted and pivoted. And that's the change we exploit as part of that innovation. We don't worry about why they did it.
Carl, on those lines, how do you find bridging the gap, or how big is the gap between, students learning theory in class to applying that? How seamless is that process, or where are the struggles?
Well, I work in a lot of different industries, and sometimes the big struggle is just the fear that people don't necessarily understand. But I think Rachel kind of flagged it, and certainly I would hear it from clients, is that it's not about being different. It's not about doing things, or it's not about doing extra. It's about doing things differently, and just kind of having that sort of lens shift to kind of the reframing of how you engage with problems. And I know Kirsty said, I don't have time to do this. But the reality is, it's not necessarily about having to carve out time, because it is now, because it's different and new. But it's the reality is, you approach problems differently, you approach work differently. You've just got a different engagement with it. And it's not that it takes longer. And the reality is, you start to create solutions that make your process more efficient anyway. So you're evolving how you work and finding space in there. So in terms of the kind of real world application of it, it's not a big shift. It's not as challenging as people might perceive it to be. But that's, for me, what it tends to be, as leadership and people getting out of their own way. And allowing themselves to do it in the workplace, and just sort of saying, when a problem sort of shows up in front of you, rather than responding with that pattern oriented complacency, here's what's worked before, so let's just do that again. It's about suspending judgment, pausing briefly, and saying, what is the problem? What am I being asked to do? How can I respond differently than I have done previously? And we have time to do that. There's sort of Parkinson's law in play a lot of the time. If you've 3 hours to work on a project, we'll take 3 hours to do the project. The reality is, you could probably do it in an hour. So there's always time to think about things a little bit differently, but we kind of have this performative pressure at times where we kind of have to do it, and still we find ourselves sort of gazing out the window and things like that, which is lovely. But the reality is, there's always scope for innovation. And as I said, it's not just that it would be nice to be more innovative. It's necessary, because things are changing so radically that people need to be prepared for the change. Not necessarily that they all have to lead the change, but they have to be prepared to, at the very least, to be responsive to the new asks from clients.
Yeah.
And for sure, like if a business has more layers, it does feel like we don't have the means to innovate. But the more layers you have, there's more room, in fact, for innovation, because in every business process or system, there's room for improvement. And innovation, in a way, is improvement through change, through creativity.
Nothing's ever been done so well that it can't be improved.
And it's not always about productivity or making something faster or cheaper or better. Sometimes a small change can make a massive effect in a business. And it can be short-sighted to think that innovation has to be an organization-wide change. It can be one tiny thing that just has implications throughout the whole business. So for bigger businesses that would be considering working on a project like this, it doesn't need to change the world. It can change one small thing.
And I don't think businesses have to, like there's a real kind of feeling that you can employ someone who's innovative, and then it's their job that they're going to be innovative, and then
you're the innovator.
Exactly, no pressure, but you're the innovator. And I think, like we've talked about that psychological safety, we've talked about those small changes, but it's incredibly important as a company to allow space for people just to come at any point. The last thing you want is to schedule innovation for 2:30 on a Tuesday afternoon and give it, like we'll all come together and we'll innovate. And there's so much pressure, and nothing good is going to really come from that. So you need to be able to take away the responsibility of innovation being a managerial and upwards problem, or not problem, but something for them to do, that it should be within the organization. And whether it's having someone come along and say, actually, if you use pictures instead of words on your signs, that'd be really great. And you're just like, absolutely, that would be great. And it'll mean that everyone who speaks a different language or has learning disabilities will be able to understand that. And we suddenly become more accessible. Yeah. Like that's as innovative as putting a brewery on the estate. Those are the kind of ends of the spectrum that we're dealing with. And it doesn't necessarily need to come from a manager upwards. It should be coming from everyone just working on their day-to-day.
What's really useful about your example, actually, in terms of using pictographs, is the fact that you haven't done it. I don't know that you have. It's an innovation in your space, but it's actually something the Olympics would have used way in the past, because they recognize the fact that you've got this space of sort of multiplicity where people don't speak the same language, so it's necessary. And that's really important about innovation, and that it doesn't need to be a brand new idea. We tend to borrow a lot of ideas, and we're generally solving old problems in new ways. So there's sort of new technology leverage. So the problem you describe is a really interesting problem. The fact that Ireland is becoming a more culturally diverse space, and the fact that you're potentially looking to key into an international tourist piece, is brilliant because it
Mhm.
presents you guys with a new problem, but it's a problem that there's already solutions for. And that's part of that's that engagement piece that's extremely important in being an innovator.
And I think the diversity of the students brings that in, because we have people that are coming from maybe like a military background, or maybe the disability space, or experience in corporate, you know, or a teacher. And you're able to bring all of that insight in a concentrated way that you wouldn't be able to get in one person.
Absolutely. We don't call it copying either. We call it repurposing. That's innovation speech. That's innovation speak. It's not copying. It's repurposing.
Analogous solutions, isn't it?
Yes. there's my tip for the day.
If you repurpose a lot of ideas, it's called bricolage. And even the language of repurposing is appropriated from other spaces by innovation speak. So
on that note, I'm going to say a huge thank you to our panelists today. I will be fully going off to ideate some I'm telling you, elephants, paragliding and breweries is going to be the take-home message today. I do want to say a massive thank you to our panelists today, to Dr. Carl Thomas, to Rachel Delaney, and to Kirsty McAdoo. It has been absolutely fantastic speaking to you. I haven't really spoken very much about the actual processes that we use to develop the programs. I will say that we have a suite of Springboard courses. All of them have this innovation project at the beginning. And one of the things that we do try and do is innovate every time we do this. And so there's a huge amount of evaluation from the students and also reflection conducted with the staff. We're always asking ourselves, how could we do this better? But if anyone would like to talk to me about how we do this, you know, how we bring together this whole village, you know, in order to innovate, I'm very happy to have a chat with anybody at any point. I promised everybody I was going to finish up, if not on time, a little bit beforehand, and I'm gifting everybody 2 minutes now. Thank you so very much for joining us. Really appreciated it, and I hope everybody has a wonderful and very safe day. And thank you very much, panelists, once again.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye.